All right, meeting is now streaming on custom
Ooh, I
live
see
streaming
the
service.
screen. Oh, the duck or the crow is back. So there is this weird, I don't know what kind of a bird it is, but it flies around this neighborhood and it sneaks under your window and it goes, ah, ah, like really loud, especially when you're sleeping or trying to do something quietly. It just like sneaks right under there and starts squawking at you. And I just heard it out there. So
Just yell at it in German. Maybe that's the key.
that scares everything. Yeah.
Are you how's your German? Are you fluent in German?
Not fluent. It's still kind of scheisse still. So.
I took 3 years of German in high school, and I always wanted to be like conversationally functional, and go to Germany one day and practice. And that never happened. So I just forgot all my German. And I had like a 3-month sprint where I was doing Duolingo every day and trying to relearn the German I had forgotten. And I did. I relearned most of it, and then I forgot it all again.
But if you again, it'll be even easier relearning it next time.
Yeah. So I think all I need to ask for is der Badzimmer and wo ist der Bier. That's all you need to know in Germany, right? It's like, where's the bathroom? Where's the beer?
Yeah.
All right. We are live on everything we would technically be live on. So that's good. So if anyone's tuning in, welcome to the Swift Kick pre-show. Say hi, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
All right. And I'm supposed to have a combined chat. So no matter where someone's watching, if they chat, I should be able to see all the chat in one place.
Okay.
It's really convenient. But, all right. Does it tell me how many people are viewing? Yes, it does. All right. So I got viewers on Twitch. No one on, well, it's not telling me on Facebook. It's not telling me LinkedIn. So it says it's sending data to those places, but it's not telling me how many people are actually watching. Oh, well. All righty. But chat is up and running. That's good. So Twitch is really the most popular right now. Everyone's watching on Twitch. So hello, Twitch. Yep, and they all went away. They just said, nope, screw this. I'm out.
Nice.
Twitch has the worst real-time stats of anything I've ever used, because it'll go from like you have no viewers and all of a sudden you have 30 viewers and then you have 3 viewers, and it's just not.
Now you know where the people from the Windows copy file dialog went to work.
Exactly.
That's it. Yeah.
And like an hour or two after the stream's done, I'll get a nice report that says, all right, here's the real numbers. We just held them from you.
Nice. Yeah, like all the Twitch is all the rage now, isn't it? Because I just know, like, I don't know how many people doing like Twitch streams and live coding Twitch and stuff like that.
I love that fad. It's I have a TV in my office, and I'll turn Twitch on and just listen to someone code in the background. It almost simulates being in an office. Like, that's one thing I miss about working in an office every day, is just having people working around me. And so if they look or sound like they're productive, I can look like I'm productive too. And Twitch gives me that sensation.
Is this like Twitch placebo?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have to be engaged in it. I can just look up every now and then and say, oh, that's a cool thing they're working on.
Actually, I saw like a live coding thing at a conference where it was not a session. It was just somebody in like a little nook area out by where the exhibitors would be. And like anybody could just come in and plug in for a while and start just coding, and it would just show what they're doing up on the screen. And a lot of people were just sitting around in beanbag chairs watching. It was pleasant watching them code and stuff like that. And yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah. All right, we have some people joining in. Ancient Coder is over on Twitch. Hi, Ancient Coder.
So that's a football person or
what's that?
football person?
See, I can't. Oh, I don't have a link I can show you. Joel Cochran is watching on YouTube. Hi, Joel.
Hi, Joel.
I already prefer this format over just the webinar jam because people are actually chatting.
Cool.
Very nice. So, all right. So we have about 5 minutes. Those who are watching, you're in the pre-show. In about 5 minutes, we'll start the real show, and we're just going to ignore you all for like 45 minutes. Naz Rulo, I hope I'm saying your name right. Good to see you too, out there on YouTube. So those wondering, I am using a service called Restream. So we're broadcasting the Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, and something else all at the same time. So if you're chatting and I'm responding to someone that you don't see, it's because they're probably on another platform. But this is really handy. I like this a lot.
Streaming to the whole internet at once.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
I need someone who's connected with me on YouTube to go check, or not YouTube, LinkedIn. Go check LinkedIn and see if I'm broadcasting on LinkedIn. Because I think I'm supposed to be. I can bring up my mobile device and see if it says I'm.
Wait, would it tell you about yourself?
I don't know. Maybe.
That's so meta.
Because I get notifications from random people and it says, oh, so-and-so is streaming live.
Yeah,
okay.
I get those too.
Honestly, I don't care about LinkedIn.
I tend to not like notifications. So I turn most of them off and I have to go into the app and then it doesn't show you the live stuff. I don't think. I don't see it in here.
No, they want you to be opted into their stuff.
Yeah.
You cannot back out of those notifications.
Twitter, I keep turning off notifications for everything constantly, and then stuff still keeps showing up. That's not like all I want for a notification is an at reply, and we're done. And then yep. I'm like, well, why am I seeing this other nonsense in here? I don't give a shit what CNET just did, right? Or
yep.
I would subscribe to their feed if that were the case. Or even if I do, I would actually go look at it and scroll through and look for these things. I don't need you to cram it in my face.
Hello to Mike Eaton, another good friend of ours.
Hi, Mike.
Matt Groves is joining us as well. We got quite a crowd here. Awesome. DIY Robotics, welcome. We should have a competition. What's more popular, Twitch, YouTube, or LinkedIn, or Facebook? Probably not Facebook at all. Yeah, no one's watching on Facebook. No one cares. Yeah, Twitch by far has the most viewers. So we'll just go with that. Let's see. Hey, Matt Groves sent 2 bits. Thanks, Matt. You're the leader, I believe. Joel, I did say Facebook. Facebook, my Facebook company page for Swift Kick. Which probably 50 people got a notification about that and just went, never mind. All right. Well, how about we just get this party started, Rachel? Get in, get out. So I'm going to start recording. And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to the SwiftKick Show. My name is Kevin Griffin. I'm the owner of SwiftKick. We're a software training and consulting company based out of Southeast Virginia. And today I am joined by the ever amazing Rachel Appel. How are you, Rachel?
I'm doing great. Kevin, how about you?
Doing great. And we've been trying something new. We're currently streaming to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the places you can possibly stream. So we have a really good live studio audience, and hopefully we have some good interaction from the group as we get into Q&A time. But like most Swift Kick shows, we need to start off with some Q&A. So Rachel, you have never been on the show before. I have 3 questions I like to ask you, just so folks who for some reason don't know who Rachel Appel is, they can get to know you a little bit more.
Okay.
So number 1, Rachel, who do you work for, and what do you say you do here?
What do I do? Things and stuff at that place. No. So I am a developer advocate at JetBrains. So JetBrains makes IDEs and developer tools, like the full spectrum, everything from actual we have .NET IDE, Java, C, Python, PHP, JavaScript, a whole bunch of IDEs. And then team tools like issue tracking and the stuff GitHub just released. We've had it for a while called UpSource, where you can browse your source code control, and Team City, a very popular team tool. So we make things for developers.
Awesome.
I'm an advocate there, so I'm somebody who's done development. Now I talk to developers out in the community, and then also our developers, and kind of bridge the gap between the two.
So you say you advocate for developers. That's your thing. Is it true that developer advocates have to love avocados?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a requirement. All right. That's just what I heard. So I want to confirm it from the source.
Yeah, I have a friend that every time there's a guacamole or an avocado in a market, or something, and this friend will go, "Look, your people." It's very corny, but it is kind of funny. But
it is, some are ripe and they're in their prime. Others are just rotten, and you need to throw them away.
Yeah. You really got to watch avocados too, because they're kind of like sneakier bananas, right? Like banana, it's green, and then 10 minutes later it's black. Like, how did that happen?
Just overnight. Yep.
Like lightning fast. So avocados tend to do that too.
At least like a rotten banana, you can still probably eat. A rotten avocado is just horrible inside if you cut it open.
Nice desserts out of bananas that are kind of blackish. So,
all right, so let's move on to question number 2. Tell us your origin story. So I've known you for years, maybe like 10 years now. But tell our folks at home, how'd you get started in tech?
It seems like I was born into it. I've been doing it for so long. When I was a kid, I got to have access to some computers in the strangest way possible, which would be that my dad was a welding teacher. This makes all kind of sense, right? It doesn't. Well, the school had extra budget. He worked at a vocational technical high school, and they would give the teachers, extra budget, and then they said, "Oh, well, we can buy computers." And they did this for a couple of years in a row. Now, this was when computers were a TRS-80, so they bought, and this is like the high-tech thing. They bought all of the instructors, one for each classroom. And then they've got an Apple IIe at one point, and like a Commodore or something. So there was a couple of years where they got those. And now, I can't say I've really looked recently, but I'm going to still say there's probably not a whole lot of welding programs out there now, even. And there sure wasn't in the late 80s. So, or actually early late 80s, all through the 80s, right? Because I graduated in 90. So my dad's like, "What do I do with this stuff?" Right? I don't know. Like, there's no way to apply this to welding. So the school's like, "Well, you do whatever you want with it." So summers, some of the teachers would take them home. So that's what my dad did. And the rest of the family was just like, what is this? A giant paperweight? Like that's big for a calculator, that kind of thing. Except for me, I'm like, oh wow, look at this little green stuff on the screen, right? And so I started doing stuff and just playing around and reading manuals, and I really liked it. And I just did that as a kid. Then, fast forward a few years, and I graduated school, and then I said, well, they actually have it was just starting the computer science degrees at Penn State, and they still taught stuff like Pascal and COBOL. So, yeehaw. Also, right before that, that same school that my father taught at, they had opened it was called a scientific data processing class. That's what it was called. It was when we had MIS departments. Remember that? Now we know exactly how old I am. It's pretty damn old, right? So I actually took data processing as a class at this tech school, and it was really the only place you could take such classes, right? With like a vocational high school. And this high school did like all the report cards for all of the schools in the county and the payrolls because they had a mainframe there. So I learned COBOL and RPG and stuff like that. And then went out on a co-op job as I started college, actually even a little bit before, or they called them co-op jobs if you came from a vo-tech school, basically a paid internship, right? So I started actually doing that in my last year or two of high school, right on into college, and it was doing COBOL on an S36 and then later an AS400. And then I started moving over to the land of PCs with some of the first Novell networks were coming out. So I was sitting there with somebody else that did stuff on the computer, and we're just like reading the manuals and trying to make the Novell network work and trying to run this weird little DBase program on it and stuff like that. So I just kind of kept going and went for comp sci at Penn State. And, eventually dropped out like a year or two later just because of money and stuff. And but I just kept working in the field. And then at some point, I was like, oh, well, I don't really need to finish my degree because I make enough money in this field. So I just worked in it forever and ever. And then actually I decided in the last year to go back and get a master's, even though I didn't actually finish the bachelor's. The school I'm at accepts like your nearly 30 years in the business as a qualification to go into a master's program for comp sci. So now I get that degree like 30 years later.
That's awesome. You got some excitement from the chat when you said talking about RPG and 400s. So there's some nostalgia going on.
I remember like debugging was that you actually printed out the code on green bar paper and to go through it with a pen. Yeah, it was good times.
Oh my goodness, that just sounds horrible. That was before my time. But
awesome then. I remember when debuggers came out, I was like, "What is this sorcery?" Now you can't live without them.
I know, yeah. And it should be taught more. It's like so many newer developers just don't know how to debug properly. They don't know how to step through a project. They don't know how to watch variables. They don't know how to do any of that crap. So that should be taught in boot camps.
Insert plug for JetBrains debugging tools here. Seriously now, we got good stuff.
All right. So last question, and probably the one I get the most unique answers for. Okay. What is your hobby or hobbies outside of tech?
Yeah. So does like napping count as a hobby? Because I really enjoy that.
Napping is a perfectly good hobby.
So I do that. I like to read. We were talking about like learning German. I like to tinker with linguistics, learning languages, which are technically two different things, but kind of related. So I like stuff like that. I do a little bit of crocheting here and there, but I'm easily distracted by other shiny things once I get halfway through a scarf or something. So stuff like that, reading. Nothing too terribly exciting, I'm afraid. So, and traveling. I do go places. I go a lot of places.
Okay. Yeah, traveling's fun.
Yeah, I like to go around and take pictures of hilariously, potentially mistranslatable signs.
Okay.
Yeah. So you get a lot
Like, you have an example that might be, well, actually, that's probably, this is a family show.
yeah, a
So,
lot of them aren't family show material.
okay.
They are very
Well, if folks are interested, they can ask you on Twitter.
although in Amsterdam there was a store called Scam. And
Okay.
I was like, dude, I just can't go shopping in here. It's a scam. And in Antwerp, there was a restaurant that they specialized in meatballs and they were called Balls of Glory. I thought that was pretty hilarious. Not so much a mistranslation, but sometimes just funny stuff like that.
Oh,
Germany,
wow.
Sweden, there's all kind of farts everywhere too, right? Because the word fart, um, in German it's F-A-H-R-T, but fart.
Yep.
Sweden, it's just flat out fart, right? So they'll say like no farting here, basically, right? You can't drive through here because it means like to drive or go somewhere. So,
Hmm.
like, no fart zones, or the buses will say in Germany, "Fahrt endet hier." So I'll be like, "Ah, fart ends here." I'm 12.
And then everyone asks why you're just walking around with a huge smile on your face, and they don't understand the irony. Yeah. Well, excellent. All right. Well, that does it for our Q&A session. And now, Rachel, you're going to talk to us about critical thinking.
Yeah.
And let's go ahead and turn it over to you and let you do what you do best.
Okay. Yeah, like critical thinking. Who does that? Do you want me to go right into the slide deck here?
If you'd like to.
Yeah, I can. So let's see. I gotta do the screen share thing. Oh no, I can't use software because I'm an old person who's been doing this for too long. All right, there we go. You can see everything, right?
I can, yes.
Cool. So critical thinking to improve your software. So developers, right? We like to think we're logical, and probably on average we're more logical than folks from many other fields. But I still see a lot of instances, both in actual projects as well as just in daily life, where people just don't apply critical thinking skills. And sometimes that translates in software. It translates to you missing features or not delivering something the customer wanted, or writing some bad code, mostly to do with actually developing a product, right? So not so much with just simply programming, although it can apply to just the nuts and bolts of programming, but it's about building software, right? The whole building process, because there's more than just writing code. In real life, I mean, this spans everything from your health decisions to, politics in your voting decisions and what religion you are and everything else. Like how you think about things drives your life. And how can you improve the way you think about things and improve your life, improve your software, and improve things by thinking better? So critical thinking, which is, not just being a skeptic or every time somebody says something going, trying to trip them up or something like that. It's also not having such an open mind that you accept anything people shovel at you, but it's sitting there, and Google and Dictionary had some good definitions. Objective analysis and evaluation, so you could form a judgment. Dictionary says it's disciplined thinking to form clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by evidence. So that's a lot of things, it's disciplined thinking is kind of an important part there. Objective analysis. Analysis is easy. Objective analysis is not. Right? It's easy to analyze when you're looking at something. It's hard to actually be objective sometimes. If you think about this, I have a section here in which I talk about, choosing a language or a platform or technology, or even coming up with, where is this team going to put the opening curly brackets? Right? It comes down sometimes to a religious decision. right? People just have a certain way of thinking and they say, no, brackets always go here or there. And is this even an important thing or not, right? And then, what works for your team? But from tiny things up to big things, right? We don't necessarily have the most disciplined thinking about stuff. And of course, it goes to more than, again, just programming or this. But picking languages, if you're doing a new project and you need to pick maybe a cloud provider, a language, and other things, people do get, what I call very religious, right? That like, oh, use Amazon or use Azure, and my cloud's better than your cloud. And this language is the only real one, or JavaScript sucks. When you dig into why, it's, well, because I already do this one and not the other. There's not really much thinking behind it. It's just that that's what you've been doing. That's the way we've always been doing it. So actually thinking about stuff and then doing it in such a way that's going to improve software and just improve quality all around is what we want to talk about. So it's a skill, right? You can develop it. It's difficult, but it becomes easier. The key that you need is you have to make yourself uncomfortable sometimes, and this will show up later in the talk. Sometimes you have to try to get around certain biases that you have, and in order to do that, you have to expose yourself to things that you might not like, right? So I might actually, I'm traditionally a Microsoft person, outside of that mainframe nonsense from way back. But, like if I were to go over and look at Amazon products, that might be a little bit more uncomfortable because that's not normally where I make my money. So things like that, you'll have to get out of your comfort zone. And we hear people talking about that, but all too often they just stay right in the comfort zone. So let's take a look at where and how we can apply it in software development outside of daily life. Requirements. This is a really big one. I don't know how many times, if you look at this graphic, how many times has this happened to everybody who's been in software more than 10 minutes, right? A customer explains something one way, project leader understands it a different way, the engineer and the architect come up with something different. I love how the programmer wrote it because it's so appropriate. What they really wanted, we don't have to worry about how the customer was billed and things like that, or how it was documented for the purpose of this talk. But you get the point here that, there's all these different people that are involved, and they all had a whole different vision of, this whole application, or even just a feature of the application and how it would work. And then folks sit around and go, oh, I had no idea. Or you're always very stunned, like, oh, I had no idea. What do you mean? This is what I gave you. This is what you asked for. No, it's not. So the important thing is, in the end, we need the customer to be able to use it and to be able to really love that software. So we need to be able to get all of these people on the same page. And we can't do that unless we can think critically about writing software. So the first part of requirements is listening to people. We hear people, but we don't listen. If you're having a discussion, and we know this online, if you're having a discussion online, people are just waiting to reply. They're not actually listening or reading, and reading comprehension skills seem to just go down every day. We hear things that people say. They say, I want software that will, save a file. And I heard those words, but I don't know what that means to them. Maybe when this person said that, they meant, to permanently save it to a specific location in the cloud all the time without being asked or something like that. Maybe they didn't. Maybe when they said that, they meant, I don't actually want to do a Control S or a file save. I just want this to magically auto save for me, something like that, right? So, they're saying something and they have this expectation and this image in their head, and we hear the words, but we get a different image in our head, and then those images don't always match. So we need to be able to link these images up and make them come very close to matching. For example, if I tell people to think of a dog, everybody, immediately, if you were to actually have somebody pick out on the internet the closest picture of the dog, somebody might have a shepherd, someone else a chihuahua, another person a golden retriever, or somebody might even pick a cat, so it's all this very different imagery that pops up in your head. So we have to be able to think about what people want, hear them, so that we can start actually forming proper conclusions about what we need to do for them. So the examples of not hearing is all over social networking, right? It's poor critical thinking. If you're not hearing, you can't think well. For example, the puppies and the kittens. Somebody will actually post, I like puppies. And then somebody will be like, well, why do you hate kittens? Well, this is a logic problem. Why? Because somebody posted, didn't say anything about kittens, right? And you can take this and extrapolate to your favorite political topic, which I'm specifically leaving out here, just because it's, not appropriate to throw politics into, well, I don't like to throw them into my talks, but, puppies, I like puppies. Okay, great. So if you wanted to be able to think about what this person said, I like puppies, maybe even they said, I like puppies because puppies are smart and fluffy and cuddly. So if you wanted to form an argument against that, you could say, oh, well, not all puppies are fluffy. But bringing kittens into it doesn't do anything. It kind of veers off into what's technically called a red herring fallacy, right? You've gone and took a look at this core topic of puppies and then just kind of redirected over to kittens, which really didn't have anything to do with the original content. So this happens in software. I don't know how many times somebody has asked for something, somebody else did not hear them, and then just went and wrote their own features anyway of what they thought that person should have. Now, we might know some large technology companies that do this, right? And not necessarily the company as a whole, but this team or that team. This pattern is repeated all over software. I don't know how many times something has come out for developers, and this is for developers by developers, let alone for non-technical people by developers, where you have a even greater gap in terminology and being able to line up your thoughts, right? So this happens a lot. You get this new framework, new stuff, especially when .NET came out. It's happened in Microsoft before. People would ask for something, products would come out, and then developers go, what is this BS? Right? We didn't ask for this. This is not what we wanted. You did not hear what we said. That's a common gripe with technology companies, right? They're customers who are often tech people as well, so it should be better and easier to line up the thinking, but nope, they aren't giving them what they like. So the problem, right, the person who was responding to that isn't listening, right? They made assumptions about the topic and staying on topic and about what the original person or that person that posted, like, I like kittens or I like puppies, fluffy little puppies, whatever. So that's the problem, is a bunch of assumptions made about the feature, the topic, or whatever it is that came up, and then possibly about the person who made it as well. All right, so if somebody says, well, you hate kittens, why would saying I like puppies necessarily and automatically mean that I hate kittens? Well, it doesn't mean anything about kittens, right? So somebody made a lot of assumptions and even just went off into a slightly different topic, right? So they made a modification there. That's not good thinking, right? And that happens very often, again, in software, right? The developers of products don't listen. They make assumptions about people. And if you look at even Microsoft historically, they had for a while personas, and these personas were what they based or who they thought their users of the software was. And one was Elvis, one was Einstein, and one was Mort. And So of course, like Einstein is like super programmer, and then Elvis is your run-of-the-mill programmer that wants to be a rock star. For some reason, I guess Elvis is not at this point yet. And then Mort, who's kind of a buffoon. And now we do have all of those types of people in software, but you're not limited to 3 types of people that develop software. There's many, many more. So Microsoft in the last several years has figured out, oh, there are many, many more. Maybe we should just drop these personas and start looking at other ways and other categories of people, or maybe not categorizing people and just saying, do people tend to want this feature instead of focusing on the person, focus on the feature. So fixing problems like this during the requirement stage, right? Like somebody says something about puppies. Well, what kind of puppies? What breeds? What size? Are these easy to train puppies? All these, you need to ask questions about puppies, not kittens, right? Don't assume things. If somebody says they like puppies, that's great. That's what that's about, right? And literally, people write software for veterinarians. So if they're doing this literal puppy kitten thing, maybe the vet wants to specialize in puppies, right? And then so somebody is focused on kittens, they're not going to get the best quality care or backup with software for that veterinarian out there, right? So try not to assume things and ask all kind of questions so you can be in a parallel mindset with the person who needs that requirement help, right? So usually that's your product stake owner or the customers or whatever, depending on if you're building software for the public or just for your corporation. Also avoid hyperbole and projection, which is, somebody says, I like puppies, you going, oh, you hate kittens, you want them dead. That's hyperbole, and that's really exaggerating the possible position of that person, which actually it's possible, but it may not even be their probable position, right? So you're projecting that onto them. Don't do that. Don't project things onto your users. Ask users, right? Questions are your friends, right? So back to like saving data. This is one I've seen literally this come up about saving data. I don't know how many times, where somebody says, we want to be able to save data. When they say that, they have a very specific thing. They're either thinking, well, we've always done a file save or file save as, and I want to do that. But they don't say it. They're just saying, like, I just want to save the data. And that's about it. It's up to you as the person who's developing an entire product, not just writing the code, but developing this product, to say, okay, you want to save data. What exactly do you want to save? You have this document, do you want to save the whole document? Do you want to be able to save parts of it? Do you want to have to manually save or auto save or whatever? Like, you need to ask those questions. But instead, developers do things like they just come up with something. Oh, product owner only wants auto save. They don't want to manually save. And I don't like that. I think they should be able to manually save. Well, no, this also, and also with the puppy kitten thing, right? It's black and white, either or thinking, right? So if they say they want something or don't want something, it doesn't automatically mean that the opposite is so, right? So if somebody says, I want to automatically save, well, what does that mean, right? To them, that might actually mean a keystroke. If they might mean it's on a timer. For others, it might mean every time you make a change. So you have to get to this with questions. So thinking about what they're asking means asking questions to get to that thought. So check your assumptions, ask your questions, something that addresses this somewhat. Domain-driven design, right? So DDD. And there's other structured processes that may help with this, right? And I'm not saying solve, I'm saying help. Because there's no silver bullets or just simple solutions for things. But DDD does a thing called ubiquitous language. And one of the aims of that is to make sure that, if you're talking about saving, that you've defined what that means. Does it mean saving to the disk? Does it mean saving to the cloud instead? The disk over there. Does that mean automatically? Does that mean somebody has to do a control does. So you have to define exactly what that little action or term means. And that helps quite a bit. This doesn't mean you have to go out and do DDD, but if you start to think about the fact that that image in your head is probably not going to match the image in the other person's head, you need to get to the questions, and you just keep digging and digging to try and find out exactly what they're asking you for, right? So structured questioning helps with things like that. Working with domain experts, DDD is big on that. But if you have domain experts in that thing, so if you're working with puppies and kittens, that would be the vet, right? Or the vet tech. If you're working with, whatever product it is at a company, it's those people that use that product every day. May or may not be the product owner, usually it is. Sometimes it's management, but often it's not. Often management doesn't use all the functions, but some little peon is using this every day and saving every day and working with something every day, and they'll know the workarounds and the aggravations and the other parts of your software like that. So you need to get to those people to help check your assumptions and think better about the requirements and how you're going to meet them to build your feature. Now, so that's just one part. And there's other things you could do, but that should help us a little bit in requirements. Something else that happens, often before the requirements, but sometimes after, depending on how you're building it, is choosing the language and the technology, the platform, the technology, right? All of that, everything that goes with building a product, right? So of course, now I often just find fun entertainment in kind of just arguing, jesting around with friends on the internet. This language is better, yours sucks, stuff like that. But I'm, playing around and generally not serious. But there are people who are very serious, and they're like, AWS, we're done, or C# or F#, and anything that's not functional, throw it out. So you have people who are very much married to and very greatly invested in a particular stack, language, etc. Right? Angular, React, whatever, JavaScript, JavaScript wars with the different frameworks. And then someone from .NET will come along and go, no, JavaScript sucks. So you have all of that. Often that just gets to be religious, right? People just aren't thinking about anything except this is what we've always done and we like it, and we have a community around it. It makes us feel comfortable, and it's always been done this way. So that's what we don't want to do. So when we're picking languages and technologies, the critical thinking here is we have to think about everyone on the team, right? It's most often not simply you. And don't just assume either. So if you're choosing a language, don't sit there and be like, oh, everybody here is pretty senior, so we'll go with, some crazy technology or something, right? Don't assume. Actually evaluate people, sit and ask them where they feel they're at, maybe have them try some coding katas or something to get a gauge of how they program and what skill level they're at, help choose a language that'll suit everybody best. Try to think about who you're going to hire in the future. Are you going to hire juniors into the team? Are you going to try to keep it more senior? And I would argue that just a whole bunch of seniors ends up in a whole bunch of very whiny but experienced people arguing about stuff. And sometimes you have a bias of, experience that somebody will come along with fresh eyes and say like, oh, look, the emperor has no clothes. Everybody seems to have forgotten that. So that happens sometimes. I remember somebody asked if I would take a look at a problem that they were working on because they didn't quite know how to get around helping a customer with this, fixing a software programming problem. And I said, do they need to do that? It seems like the program already does it here. And they were like, holy crap, we just never even looked at it that way. So that's something you just need to do, is get that different point of view about languages and technologies, not just your own. If there's a language that you don't like or you hate, go in and look at that all the more, right? Get out of that comfort zone, like I mentioned before, right? Especially, you know, if you hate it and you can't list easy reasons why, like I had wrote code with it and I ran across this problem and that problem and the other problem because X, Y, and Z, you know, like async is no good here. So I need something that's better at async or something like that, right? So those are the kind of things you want to think about when you choose a language. Sometimes you might need a domain-specific language, right, instead of just a general one, or in addition to. Sometimes you might need more than one. People tend to do a, you know, one thing to rule them all, right? So we use C# everywhere. Well, that's great, but if you have a relational database, you need SQL too. Oh, we could use Entity Framework. Well, you could, but that's going to write SQL for you. Right? So at some point, you're using it somewhere. If you're using SQL, of course, you know, so things like that. You might need a DSL or another language as well. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, things to think about, like, do you have other targets other than, you know, the hardcore, nitty-gritty, picky things about this language? Are you actually targeting Android devices, iOS, or mobile phones in general, or is it web development? Those kind of large but easily overlooked things, right? So like target what your actual target is. Do I need an OOP language or functional or something else? There's many programming paradigms that might suit depending on what your application is. So this is one of those it depends answers all the time, right? So all this depends on what it is that your goals are for you and your team. And, you know, is everybody going to write in this language? Or some people might, but some people might specialize in something else, right? So those are things to consider. At JetBrains, we found out, this is kind of fun. We created a language called Kotlin, right? And I say we, like I was there when they did it, but I wasn't, I hadn't joined it. They created a language called Kotlin, and it was really to enhance certain, it runs on the JVM, right? So it targets JVM. And it was to fix up a couple of issues with Java. And since a lot of folks were also familiar with .NET, C#, they took some of the good features out there. And it's a fun, nice little language, right? It's general purpose. However, all of a sudden, JetBrains started noticing, like, hey, what is this? All of a sudden, like, all these Android people are writing with Kotlin. Well, here they found out that there were some features in the language that are very helpful for Android devices that they didn't even realize themselves, which is kind of hilariously ironic there. And then at some point, Google picked it up and said, well, that Kotlin is our preferred language for Android development when you're using, and of course, using Android Studio. So things like that can happen, right? So consider there's those kind of specific features that might be out there. So let's take a look at an example of some things. Maybe somebody's making a real estate prediction investment app. Sounds fancy. Basically, you know, what's the market like in this area? What is it like in that area? Well, that might have a lot of statistics and math. So maybe a functional language is better there, right? Because they tend to be a little bit more on the mathy side. You might have a lot of mathematicians working on this. And I got this example from Zillow, which is like a real estate website, and they actually do a lot of these really awesome and crazy data analytics with the real estate market. And I don't know what languages they're using or anything, but I sat and thought about some of the things that they develop as far as software. And functional languages would certainly do very well there. And that's a whole paradigm. Once you get into that, you can start limiting it to, well, do we want F# or Scala or something else? So functional language has some of those features, like avoiding shared state and immutability when you're using this language against large volumes of data. Also, you know, they have some scenarios where they could probably use multiple languages. And they actually got a lot of this material from the fact that I read a book written by the chief data officer at Zillow. He made a book called Zillow Talk, and it was about how they actually do a lot of this and some of the predictions. It was very fascinating how this company has the data just from the sales in a particular geo area, and how they get information about, this house here on Elk Street is going to skyrocket over the next year in its price, while the neighbor right next door is going to fall. So they can predict at a very interesting granular level. So I'm sure they're doing something right there. I don't know what the languages are particularly because they didn't give up the trade secrets, but just from hearing the way they describe it, this seems to be some of the things that they might use, right? So that would help. Some myths and issues, always be aware of myths. Watch Mythbusters, right? US TV program. This really helps with critical thinking in a fun way, and they blow stuff up. I mean, what more could you ask for? But there's always myths, like vendor lock-in. I mean, sure, it can happen, but I had done plenty of work for the state of Pennsylvania in various agencies, departments, and other governmental places. And every 4 years, or anytime there's a shift in the administration of the local government or the state government, very often, not every single time, but very often, they would just completely, they'd have some connection or something. So they would just completely say, oh, we used to be using SQL, but now we're going to use Oracle. And then everybody has to stop and move over to Oracle. And you don't really get any choice because it's some, political thing where, this politician A knows somebody at company B, and they switch back to Microsoft or over to Amazon or Oracle or something, right? So that happens. So vendor lock-in, if you've seen how fast an actual state or government can change this, and if they can do it with all the incompetence that comes with working for the government, other people can too. So I don't believe in vendor lock-in anymore after seeing how quickly things can shift that way. So popularity too, don't fall into that one. It's more of an issue than a myth, right? So all of a sudden there's the hot new whatever framework, right? JavaScript folks do tend to get pulled into this one. There is a JavaScript framework, comes out like every 10 minutes. So, popularity does not mean it's good. It could be good. Certain times things are popular for a reason, but other times things that are very esoteric or that came out and just kind of took a dive in popularity are actually very good. For example, Windows Phone UX. Like, I could never understand this. And I think I have more than opinion here. Like, if I were to actually make a little matrix of awesome things in a UX, Windows Phone had a very, very nice UX. And pretty much whenever I talk to people who had a Windows Phone, the one thing they miss is the UX. And people who go to Android always put that little extension to Android or one of the apps that help you make your phone look like the Windows Phone UX. That UX for a phone, not necessarily the Windows 10 and stuff like that, the laptop mode, but for the phone, boy, that was an awesome user experience. Now, of course, the App Store and other things were a whole different issue and part of why the whole thing went away. But the UX itself, I was really hoping that somebody else would copy it, steal it, or do something so it would show up on other platforms that were popular. And the best we got was a few extensions to help Android behave more like it. So nothing for Apple, of course. So popularity is something, maybe it's good because it's popular, but maybe it's not. And of course, things like this tend to fall into confirmation bias, right? So, if I like this particular thing, well, I'm going to go out and find all the more reasons why it's awesome. So you have, fanboys, right? Fan people, and they're out there doing the confirmation bias thing, like really, really good, right? So that's what they do. So in a way, me being a developer advocate for a particular company, right, would be on purpose confirmation bias to a degree, right? So that's like when you're choosing your language and technology. So that's another area in software development to apply critical thinking. Yet another area, and this is a big one, the actual product design, right? So we have the requirements, we have choosing the tech stack, and now the actual product design. And here's where there's big consequences can happen. And this is where bias and fallacies come into play quite a bit, right? So the more heavier of the critical thinking. So first thing we need to know, when we hear the word bias, people tend to think, oh yeah, that newspaper or media program or whatever is biased, right? And if that's what you think, maybe you need to read a little bit more on being biased, right? So here's the rule. Everyone, every single human on earth is biased. Everybody. And it's because bias is defined by the fact that you actually have a life experience. So that means unless you were in a coma from the minute you were born, you are having life experiences. And actually, if you're in a coma, that would be your bias, right? It would be awful, but so it's life experience. The fact that you are, born in a certain country gives you a bias. The fact that you went to a certain school, grew up in a certain town where they eat certain foods, and these certain qualities about you that you can't control gives you this bias, right? So that's how it's actually defined. So bias is not simply like, oh, politically left or right, but people tend to use the word bias that way. That's not actually what the more of a scientific or critical thinking way of bias is defined. Everybody has it. So that means literally every publication, every book, every blog post, every newscast, every piece in the paper, every single thing is biased because every human is biased. Now, what the bias is it depends on, because of these experiences, what the topic of the bias is and which way the person leans. And it doesn't mean left or right necessarily, right? It could be a sports team, right? You grew up in Pittsburgh, then maybe you're biased for the Steelers, right? Or something like that, right? So you see this a lot in sports, right? The second rule is, and here it is, bias, what I call the bias spectrum. You have this baseline, and through experiences, you get a little bit of bias, and that's where the blue is, and that's fine. You just don't want to let it go all the way over to the other side where it becomes prejudice. And this is where rule number 2 comes in. Bias isn't actually bad. That's another thing. People think, oh, bias is bad. It's bad. I don't have it. It's bad. No. It's not bad at all. It's like breathing. Or I sent a tweet out before. Here's where I'm going to say, because it's everybody does this, right? Everybody poops. Everybody has bias, right? So bias can turn into prejudice. We want to not let that happen. But bias isn't necessarily just political. It is for all sorts of things, and it's based off your life experiences. If I like vanilla, I'm going to be more biased towards vanilla type foods, right? Things like that, or scents. So bias has this spectrum that can go all the way to prejudice, but it doesn't have to. And of course, you're more biased towards yourself and people like you, and your family would be like the core of it, right? You're going to be more biased toward people who are important to you. Maybe your family's not actually important to you, but somebody, you have this little inner circle, right? And that inner circle are going to be where your biases are, and because that's where your experiences are. Rule number 2 is how it is because it is unconscious. So that means that you do not know it's happening. Right? You could know, right? We know now because I said, no, it's happening, right? However, it's when you sit there and just refuse to acknowledge that it happens, that it's a problem, right? So bias isn't bad because everybody has it and it's unconscious. When it becomes conscious, that's when it starts to turn into prejudice. So if I sit there and go, I hate JavaScript, I just do. And I might come up with a couple of reasons why, but I'm consciously verbalizing this. Maybe my bias just went into prejudice. if I don't really have any like actual legit reason. It would be like, well, syntax is ugly, and I don't like the people who write JavaScript and stuff like that. So those could be the kind of issues there with not thinking correctly. And this happens in product design, right? It's because we focus on ourselves over others. So here's real world issues with bias that will help us gain a solid understanding. This has to do a lot with because the people who are designing the product are going to design the product for them. Right? You tend to do that because that's the experience, your life experience, which causes the bias, right? So I'm going to create the product the way I would use it. If you don't, you don't have a pulse, right? That's just how humans interact with their world, right? So that's how we would build stuff. If you're going to build a house, you're going to build it the way you would use it, right? Not think up some, weird Dr. Seuss village kind of way of doing it. So things like medications and treatments. They've had many, many clinical studies in which they only had white guys in there. And then people of color have been completely overlooked. Right? And they found out that medications for Black women in many cases makes them overdose and it actually kills them. But it works for men. And just the whole gender scale too, right? Men often are heavier and larger, and then our doses are different, right? So they're now starting to look at gendered medicine, right? So that you can get the correct dosages for people, and not just gendered, but also medicine for certain ages. They've done a bit more with geriatrics in this area, but children often they just go, well, just give them less of a dose or have children's Tylenol. But sometimes they're completely overlooked, right? So men were used in the trials, and then medications for others were overlooked. Same thing when seatbelts first came out. Seatbelts were made by adult men and for adult men only, and the crash test dummies were male. And then when they finally decided to make them female crash test dummies, basically all they did was put breasts on them, and that was that. Well, if you're going to test this, first of all, you need a range of sizes for men because not all men are a standard man size, whatever that is decided to be. But there's some women there that are also very tiny and some that are large. And they didn't even consider things like folks that are little people, right, that seatbelts don't work well for. But there was children actually died, a lot of them, enough for them to go, oh crap, we didn't even think of this when seatbelts first came out, because people didn't even consider that children might be actually sitting in the car. And then they ended up taking kids and saying, go in the back seat. And they still don't have kid crash test dummies in many places that actually test them. Right? So we're accepting ratings of the safety of cars when often they're not even considering children, right? Which is not good. There's been in the news lately, AI detects white faces. And sometimes it's like person of color. And it's just like, I don't know what that is. Well, that's not good, right? We can't have that going on, especially when AI is starting to be used for, detection for policing or, allowing people on an airplane and other things like that, or into court, stuff like that. So there's a lot of issues with real world bias. And it doesn't mean that any of these designers were bad or anything like that. No, it's just simply that they had their experiences, right? Their own experiences. And just when you have your own experience, you aren't thinking about other people's experiences generally, right? Because that's a human trait. When you're going about your day, you're not thinking about everyone else in the world and how you might accommodate them. Well, that also happens in software. So what we want to do if we want to critically think about this is we want to open ourselves up and get out of the comfort zone and start thinking about actually all the users that are different than us. So that would be ways to do that. One is empathy. That's been a bit of a topic. I see this coming up a lot on Twitter and in some conferences. And it's really trying to understand what your user is doing. Like, really, what are they doing? Right? Investigating properly. So if those people took a look and they said, who actually is riding in the car? Instead of just saying like, hey, here's our team and this is what we do, and it's just a couple of the same type of people. They actually took a look at what's, who's riding in the car, including the family dog. That might have helped. Peer review, right? So get peers, and actually, I say peer review, but maybe it should be not peer review. Maybe it should be people who aren't your peers, people who are as different as possible from you to, go and review things. Also avoiding generalizations, right? No more of the Mort Einstein Elvis stuff. And don't say like, well, people who, use this software are smart or stupid. I hear a lot of things like that. Somebody reports a bug and then somebody on a development team says, oh, well, they were just dumb. Well, you don't mean just them either. You usually mean like all the users, right? So avoid generalizations, because you usually just generalize to what you would do anyway. Avoiding assumptions again, check your fallacies, and the diverse team. So if it is a team of all the same type of people that had similar experiences, right? Or in similar towns, maybe across the US, similar gender, skin type, all those things, then you're probably not going to have those experiences that somebody from India, China, Europe, South America, somebody with different heights, or somebody who's disabled, or somebody who has accessibility issues. Accessibility is so often overlooked in software. So if you don't, if your eyes are perfect and you're creating the software and you're not thinking about other people, you don't have that empathy, you don't investigate, you're not reviewing it, and you don't have a diverse team to help you, you might forget that, maybe there's blind people using your software and you don't make that accessible at all. And we see that's a big problem on the web. So I have talks I give on accessibility. And a lot of it is that people just they don't sit down with a screen reader, a screen narrator, and actually bring up their website and blindfold themselves and let the screen narrator do its thing and try to behave as if you were a blind person. Just try that. That'll change your conception of bias, because it will be so maddening for you. You will wonder how people that are blind could even use a computer at all. Or try being a deaf person and there's no closed captions, right? So you have to try to figure out everything that's going on by just watching a video, right? Those kind of things. So we can put ourselves in other people's shoes and do these things to reduce that bias. And all the biases is that we look inward and we consider ourselves and we forget about other people. Again, that doesn't make us bad, not at all. It makes us human. And we're working with computers. So we want to get out of the human and be more like a computer and consider all the possibilities. Outside of those kind of biases, and this goes out into just regular life, if you're having a conversation, there's so many biases. You can go to yourbiasis.com. There's also yourlogicalfallacyis.com. And they give like these cool little posters with all these different biases that you can have and fallacies you can make. So like confirmation bias, right? If I'm designing a car, sure, I'm going to make crash test dummies that look like me and are like me, right? Well, that's confirmation bias. Other things like the IKEA effect. I see this. Also, somewhat related, not invented here syndrome, right? So things like if we built it, it's better than somebody else, right? So you get that thing from IKEA, even if you built it and the couch is missing some of the legs and it goes plunk plunk every time you sit down, you still like it better because you built it, you put effort into it. Loss aversion is another one. That's not here on the slide, but I don't know how many times I've seen a death march on a project, and that is that happening. So they know that the project's going to fail. They spent too much money, spent too much time, but loss aversion says just keep doing it. It'll get better. Sometimes you have to just stop, back up, and think about like, is this really worth it? So people do this in the stock market all the time and they lose their shirts on it, especially when the stock market starts tanking and they just wait and wait and hold out. And then they go, crap. And then they sell and then the market goes back up, right? And they don't quite, they're dealing more emotionally than thinking about what's happening or getting the help of an expert. Some other things too, we do this a lot in tech, curse of knowledge. So, I know how to use this app and I wrote the app. Of course, I know how to use this app. And why can't this user figure it out? Right? Well, because I never did before. Or we see this in conferences. People don't want to give beginner talks. Oh, well, everybody knows this, or everybody's familiar with object orientation and inheritance and things. Maybe they're not. If they just started a few months ago, or just got out of a boot camp and are starting their career, they might not quite understand these things. So those kind of things are some biases, and these get in the way of building software very often. And there's many, many more, but these are just some popular ones. So if we want to reduce bias in ourselves, well, first thing is to go out and find, you'll be maybe a little saddened to see how fallible humans are, but educate yourself in the ways you have bias. Like, you do confirmation bias. A lot of these, if I go back here, I can spot sometimes even when I'm doing them, right? Or the gambler's fallacy, right? Well, this worked before. Let's try it again. It might work now. Maybe it doesn't, right? Not if you didn't look at if this feature is actually going to work, right? So you can figure out what biases there are, what are common biases, and then think about, like, do I have this? Remember, it's okay. It's okay because you're human, so you'll have biases. You just want to try to figure out what they are and then mitigate them a little bit, right? So practice these things. Go out and read about them and try to find out, there's many times I've said, oh, yes, I think I remember there's this fallacy or that bias that I've caught myself doing. And then I try to adjust, right? So the more you try to practice actually catching yourself having bias and kind of gamify it for yourself and be okay with the fact that this is just being human, and humans are not perfect, then you're good. You're doing really good. It's when you refuse to believe that you have bias and you refuse to believe that you make any of these fallacies, which does necessarily mean that you think you're perfect. And that's not cool, because you're not. Nobody is. That's another bias people have, right? They want to say things like, no, humans are perfect, but then they behave in ways that try to make themselves look like they're perfect. Well, it's okay to not be, right? And I think a little bit of that is society at large trying to kind of pigeonhole people into those things, right? So something for confirmation bias, since this happens a lot, right? Just take a look at something and you immediately agree or disagree. If you do, it could be confirmation bias or confirming in the opposite direction. So what you need to do is specifically look for an opposite viewpoint and not just see that there is one, but actually read it, try to take it apart and say, okay, I'm going to play debate team. And debate teams where you might take any random position on a topic, and then you go out there and evangelize for that side, right? You really have to try to convince yourself that the opposite is true. So it's getting out of your comfort zone. And that's where back in the beginning I said it's going to be not comfortable, right? You have to go and do these things that might be a little hard emotionally to do. And that's something to remember, is that a lot of this comes down to emotions, right? I agree with this or I disagree. They're emotions, right? And they're not bad at all. They're human, right? So it's cool. But we just need to understand that we have them and then work with them to try to get the best possible answer. So a fallacy, similar to a bias or often tied into a bias, is just an error in thinking. So it's also like people say the word fallacy and then they think, big, bad, horrible sounding thing there. No, it's just an error in your thinking. And just because you make a fallacy doesn't mean that your proposition was wrong necessarily, but you can have errors in thinking along the way, right? So common ones we see in software and in life, a slippery slope. Well, if we give our users this, X teacher, pretty soon they're going to want all this other stuff, right? Or if we price it this way, pretty soon, we'll be giving away everything for free. Well, the slippery slope doesn't always have to happen. There's easy ways to kind of put boxes around that. A false cause, I have a little link there to a YouTube video. My favorite false cause or causality is Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street. There's a little skit in which Ernie's standing around with a banana. He's holding a banana in his ear. And Bert says, "What are you doing with this banana in your ear?" Right? And Ernie goes, "Well, I'm keeping away the alligators." And Bert's like, "What? What? Right? He does not understand why Ernie would say this. And Ernie goes, "Well, do you see any alligators on Sesame?" Well, Bert goes, "There's no alligators on Sesame Street." And Ernie goes, "Yes, you don't see any alligators on Sesame Street, do you? It's working." It's total false cause. So very often in technology, we do a false cause, right? So this thing caused a bug or user error, right? And this kind of ties in with this fundamental attribution error that's on the slide, right? So that means that we would look at the user and go, "Oh, the user did this really stupid thing, and it caused a bug, and it's them because they're idiots, right? That person's an idiot. That's what they did. They did this terrible thing with the software. They don't know how to use it." Well, you're maybe attributing it wrong. Maybe your software doesn't work in this case, or maybe something's wrong. You need to go and investigate. It's the same kind of thing when you're walking down the sidewalk. If you see somebody else trip, you're like, yeah, they're clumsy. But if you trip, it's like, oh, well, the sidewalk was uneven. Right? So I'm not attributing better qualities to myself than I would to someone else. And we do that a lot in product design. We do that a lot in programming. So we want to try to keep that on an even keel. Another one that comes with language, usually when you're picking your language and technologies, the no true Scotsman. Right? No real developer would ever write in this language. Right? We hear that one constantly. It's actually a fallacy, right? And it comes from the Scottish people who apparently like porridge way too much. Right? No true Scotsman eats porridge with sugar or something like that. And then two Scottish people argue about it. And since they have the Scottish accent, nobody can actually understand what they're saying anyway, so it doesn't matter. But those are some common fallacies, along with black and white thinking. We see a lot of that, right? Either or, I like puppies. Well, why do you hate kittens? That's black and white, and it doesn't actually work very well, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that. One doesn't mean the other. So there's some fallacies and biases that we can think about when we're actually doing product design. And there's many more, but there's some of the more popular ones that tend to crop up. Something that can help us think better is problem-solving skills. So problem solving and creative thinking, I like to use this outside of the box kind of thinking. We use this term all the time. I'll think outside of the box. And then people get, yeah, that's what we do. We're all doing it. Yeah. What does that mean? Well, it means to think about things in that different perspective. And really, if you're on a team, that's where that diverse team comes in, because you will have those different perspectives because of different biases, because of different life experiences. So one of the, like a creative thinking game is this 9 dots game, where you take 4 straight lines, right, that are connected to each other, and go through all the dots. And people will go and they'll go, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll kind of go around the dots, and then nope, the one in the middle. And they'll try it a different way and a couple different ways, and usually they just can't quite figure it out. So OCD, one of these dots are misaligned. I'm gonna have to fix that later. However, so things that they don't think about, the creative thinking and the thinking outside the box, is that nobody said, here's also the asking questions and not making assumptions. Nobody said that the line had to stay within the realm of the dots. So maybe the second line is going to go over a bit. And then the third line will only go through 2 dots and then just kind of go past them on the bottom, and then the third. And so now I've gone through all of the dots. But that's something that we didn't think about. Often you can make little hints for these games and say, well, if you give somebody a hint and say, well, you don't have to stop at the edge of the dots, right? Then they usually go, oh, and they can kind of think of a better solution. But without the little nudge, often that's terribly difficult. And if everybody's the same, it's kind of hard to get that nudge, right? Or if you don't go out and ask customers and ask other people, or do peer review or external peer review, which is not your peers, it's other people. It may be hard to actually think outside of the box, right? You need somebody who's out there already to give you a hint to get you out of there so you can go and look at it in a different way, right? So outside of the box thinking. Otherwise, you're cat. You belong in that box. I just think cat. So some ways to help us also solve problems and think better. Patterns are a great way to do this. Now, sometimes they aren't. Right? Sometimes people just go, yes, patterns. We got to do MVC. We got to do solid. We got to do this, right? And then that's all they do. And they apply that everywhere, every time, all the time. Well, there's no silver bullet. So applying something everywhere, all the time, every time doesn't always work. And I'm pretty sure everybody listening has worked with that person. Sometimes maybe you've been that person. I will have to say over almost 30 years, I've been that person. You find this thing, you really like this thing, this pattern, this, little technique, whatever it is. And then you just want to do it everywhere and you tell everyone about it. And it's the best thing ever. And, it's awesome. You're so passionate about it and you really like this thing that is very productive and a very good thing. But that doesn't mean it does everywhere. And you will come up against where if you fall into this trap, right? We all have, I'm sure. And you apply it somewhere and it just works like crap. And then what happens is, people usually either adjust and they go, oh, yeah, I kind of got carried away. This is a really great thing. And I kind of stretched it to somewhere it didn't really apply, right? And I lost my thinking there. So what I'll do is I'll try a different pattern or a different technique. So people do that, or some people try to fit the square peg in the round hole, and they just keep plugging away at trying to make that pattern or technique or whatever it is just fit. When it doesn't, a lot of people, they come from object orientation and they'll go to like JavaScript or even F#, and they'll try to squeeze objects and class hierarchies in everywhere, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes, but not always. So things like that. So patterns are usually good to help us kind of have a processed thinking. So we can do our creative thinking, but then we can take that and put it into techniques that tend to help. And that's with your actual coding skills generally. So far, I've been talking about more of the building of software and products, but also in programming itself, right? So when we mess up on our patterns, it ends up being an anti-pattern, or sometimes we just fall into an anti-pattern as a team or in some company, right? Where we just do things, and we do it consistently, but consistently backward. Although I have to say, I'd rather something be consistently backward and consistently crappy than confusingly crappy or just intermittently that way. So consistency is still a little bit better. Something else to help with thinking better, emotional intelligence. We tend to not think that this is needed in software development. Like what? You need mathy intelligence and this logic, but you can't have logic without EI. Emotional intelligence is self-awareness, right? So I know that I have these biases and that when I write and design these products, I'm thinking of just me. And also, just general self-awareness. You've probably said about some friend, boy, they are horribly self-unaware. That happens too. Or people who tend to do hypocritical things, right? Not self-aware. Self-management, which is basically, not throwing temper tantrums and being able to identify like, oh, This is uncomfortable, right? And that's an emotion. Being able to identify and manage your emotion, right? So it's this emotional competence inventory, which is an actual thing. If you go and Google or Bing this, you'll see some psychologists came up with it, and it's things that make a good emotional intelligence. Social awareness, which is empathy, right? Knowing and being able to place yourself in other people's shoes, and within a cultural context, as well as individual relationships. And that kind of falls right into relationship management. So those are some things we need to work on. Yeah, developers anymore. We went for a few decades there where these things weren't really promoted or very popular. And people were getting, if you look at some early software, not user friendly at all, right? A lot of software was really only valuable and usable for the tech people. But now that we see an explosion where more and more people have phones and other smart devices and IoT stuff and all these different things where non-tech people and non-specialized people, well, we have to be able to work and build things for people, for all those people. And, you know, out of 7 billion people on Earth and the number of people who can use products from that pool of people, that's a lot, it's billions. So we have to think about the fact that a lot of them, most of them are not going to be like ourselves. So we have to be able to manage and be aware of all these things. So some thinking examples. Here's a nice easy one, right? You need a degree to get a good job. This comes up in our field a lot. But if we want to critically think about this claim, right? So just in general, like a critical thinking example. Well, first up, we want to question this, right? Okay. No, well, before the first up, 0 up. How's this? If I said you need a degree to get a good job. First thing to think is, do I automatically agree or disagree with this statement, right? And just keep that in your head. Okay. Then second, first up, right? Question this, right? Define it. Like, well, what is a good job? So when somebody says get a good job, what does that mean? Does that mean the pay? Does that mean other things that it's reporting? So what's a good job to one person? It's like the dog, right? You have this image of what it is in your head, but somebody else has a different image in their head. So we have to remember, we're going to have that image misalignment. So what is a good job? Right? We have to sit and define that. So what if we're working for like monster.com or Career Builder or something like that? This would actually be a legit question. Maybe they want to recommend good jobs. Like, what's a good job, right? And what field? All right. One assumption we could make is, all right, I'm talking to software developers about software development. It's probably going to be something about IT here, the field, but maybe not in some cases, right? What about nursing? Or truck driving or whatever. You need a degree for truck driving. Well, you do need a CDL, right? You do need a license for that. Right? Also, what country, state, or locale? Right? Because what might be considered a good job here is not there because of the local economy or other factors. Right? And then what kind of degree? Not just what's a good job, but what kind of degree do you mean when you say degree? Which one? Just a bachelor's, something else? Maybe just an associate's or a boot camp, right? So those are all things to question. So the first thing we want to do is start questioning stuff, right? Start digging out more and more information and doing that investigation that I already mentioned. So we want to do that. So we start with these questions. And then we can kind of revisit that whole, did I automatically agree with this or not? Well, if you automatically agreed or disagreed with the statement, you did not have enough information, right? And most people do automatically agree or disagree, right? And that would be confirmation bias or the opposite. But we often need to come in here and do this extra work before you should agree or disagree, right? So we want to pause things when we can and step back for a second so we can actually think about it. So some other things I might do is, well, defining that good job and investigating this more. Stats and examples, like who has a degree in this field and good jobs as we defined, right? So who doesn't have degrees but has good jobs, as we define these good jobs? Who are experts as far as what a good job is? And what about experts in this field that we're talking about and in this locale? What do they say? How about HR? They tend to be people who have this kind of data on this thing. What do they think? What about companies in general? What are they, if I go and look at the job market here and there, what keeps showing up? Is there, certain patterns that I might be able to flesh out from searching various jobs, right? And then I can start to define what a good job is, and also what the degree might be that's needed to actually finish the question, right? Which is the most important thing, right? And in software, if somebody were to implement this feature of showing people good jobs, well, and if they need a degree or not, they wouldn't even have half of the information. So we really need to do that. And that even goes back to the requirements and analyzing that properly. So that's some more things to think about. And that's like a nice little easy example to do that. So the answer to everything we all know is 42, right? But other than that, sometimes the answer is I don't know, right? So we might know what a good job is in the US, but maybe we don't know what a good job is in an African country, right? So we're asking, do you need a degree? Maybe you do in Uganda. Maybe that's a requirement. Maybe they need something, companies simply won't hire you without it. Maybe nobody knows, right? And these answers too are for everything, not just for technology, right? Anywhere that you can apply critical thinking. Sometimes the answer is maybe, or it depends. So sometimes the answer is not always the answer you want. Sometimes the answer is not always a hard answer, like 42, or, yes, you can get a good job without a degree, or no, you can't. So sometimes the answer is not evident, and we can actually code that into software, right? We can say, well, we can recommend good jobs, but what would you like to see as your version of a good job, dear user? All right, so we can do things like that and structure software in a different way, perhaps, and think about how other people might use it rather than just kind of shoveling what we think they might want to see in to their faces, right? So stuff like that. So this is, obviously in this talk, I can't go over every bias, every, way to think and way to extrapolate information, and also things like, you're not going to get a perfect answer every time. You're not going to have a perfect argument. There will be fallacies and biases, no matter how much you try to overcome it. But it's kind of like computer security, right? The goal of security is not to have a perfectly secure system, because you can't, right? So what they do is they try to minimize the attack surface as much as possible, right? So that's the real goal, is minimizing that surface. And the same thing for here. We want to minimize the biases and fallacies that we make. Or if for whatever reason we can choose not to, if it's a bias, a fallacy is an actual error in thinking, but a bias is not, it's just based off of your experience. So we can choose to say, look, I know I confirmed my suspicions, so that's confirmation bias, but I'm acknowledging it and I'm still going to run with it. So as long as we either acknowledge it or try to mitigate it and manage it, that's the key. What we don't want to do is go through and just pretend that it doesn't happen, or pretend that it happens to everybody but us, or that we don't make these kind of errors and thoughts. So we just want to make our thinking better. We will never make our thinking perfect, because we're not, and the world is messy. So those things can never happen. But we can try to make our thinking better, and the better we think is the better we'll be able to build, and the better we'll be able to deliver as far as products go for our clients. And that's all I have. So I hope I didn't run terribly far over time.
No, you did great.
Cool.
All right, let me turn my video back on. That was awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, That there was a little bit of chatter in the chat, but we'll open it up for questions now. So if anyone's out there and they want to ask Rachel a question, now's your time. If not, you have to bug her the old-fashioned way on Twitter. Right, as you're taking a drink of water.
10-7.
Some folks got excited because you mentioned Windows Phone. So, oh, you mentioned another outdated technology that I used to love.
The UX was awesome. It was.
All right. Well, everyone is quiet at the moment, but that's fine. Again, Rachel, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And we will see you all again in another week or two on the Swift Kick Show. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. So we are still streaming.
Okay.
This is now the after show. So
okay.
so I have the recording, which is like the beginning to the end, and then that's what will go up on YouTube. The rest of this is just streaming for whoever's joining us. And so YouTube actually became the winner. It had the most viewers concurrently. Nice. So
you have totals yet of
I don't know. It was like, so across all the platforms, it was up and down. And I think after we're done streaming, I'll get the official numbers. Like, here's how many unique viewers you had. Here's how many max viewers, the minimum number of viewers. Everyone's dropped off now that this show's over.
Right.
But that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, definitely. And this will be up on YouTube in like probably a week.
Okay.
And you'll see tweets occasionally promoting it. So if you ever see a tweet, just hit retweet, and we'll just keep promoting it until the end of the time, because this is pretty evergreen. This will never be outdated, and this is good stuff.
This as long as humans are human, until the robots take us over. We're good.
Yeah. Well, all right, Rachel, thank you so much again. Talk to you later. Have fun.
Talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Bye.